Awesome. So hello, everyone. Can you all see my screen? Maybe thumbs up. Perfect. So welcome to the SCWIST Science Symposium. Very excited to have you here today. Today we are doing the global warming category, our first presentation, and we have our judges, Claris, Cecilia, and today we have Amy who will be doing her presentation. I'm also happy to introduce myself. My name is Ashley and I am the Vice Chair of the Science Symposium. And in the background, we have Noeen, and she is the chair of the Science Symposium, and this is her brainchild, so you may hear her occasionally from the background. Before we get started with the Science Symposium, I would like to take a moment to reflect, to do a quick land acknowledgement and just reflect on our connection to the land that we live on here at SCWIST Vancouver. And we are on the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Stolo, the Sechelt, the Squamish, and the Indigenous people of Turtle Island. So we are in round 2 of the Science Symposium, and the category that we are starting today is global warming, which is in the Earth and Environmental Sciences. And today we have Amy Heim, sorry, I probably said your name wrong, from St. Mary's University, who will be doing her presentation. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping rules. Please note that today's event is being recorded and will be put on YouTube at a later date. We ask that those who are speaking do keep their mobile phones muted during the time that they are presenting. And please note for the audience that we do have a chat box and we will be answering Amy will be answering any questions that you have about her presentation. So if you have any questions, please drop them in that chat anytime during the presentation, and we will ask them during our panel discussion. Or sorry, not our panel, our Q&A from the audience. Before we get started, we do also have a couple of really great sponsors who have helped make the Science Symposium possible. We have Northeastern University in Vancouver. They have a 95 employment rate for biotechnology, so if you're interested in that, please check it out. We have Admare Bioinnovations, so if you want to polish your skills in business or science, check out their programs. We have AbCellera. They discovered the antibody that neutralizes the viral variants of COVID-19, so we're very excited to have them on board. As well as Microsoft, so if you're interested in an internship in IT, please check out their website. And Acutus Therapeutics, and they provided the lipid nanoparticle delivery system that is a key element of the Pfizer vaccines. We're also very excited to have them on board. And we also have Kruger, and they developed a revolutionary bio-based material with unique properties called the PhyloCell. And this new additive will enhance the performance of your products unlike any other and can be leveraged in numerous applications, including automotive, construction, and aerospace, to name a few. So very exciting thing that they have going on there. So as I mentioned, we have our judges. So I'll give you each a moment to introduce yourselves. And then Amy will head on over to you and you will be able to introduce yourself, give us a little background before launching into your presentation. And Clarice, just because you're first in line, I will call on you first.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ashley. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claris Canta. I'm working at Student Energy, a global youth-led nonprofit empowering the next generation of leaders who are accelerating our transition to a just and sustainable energy future. Before joining Student Energy, I worked for project development of renewable energy projects in the Philippines. I have key experience in solar, wind, and geothermal power projects in different stages of project development. I got a degree in University of Melbourne for a master's in energy systems, and my interest is in renewable energy technologies as well as the climate and energy nexus. So back to you, Ashley.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And Cecilia, I'll bring it over to you.
Thank you, Ashley. Well, I'm a lecturer in the Faculty of Health Sciences in Simon Fraser University, where I also completed my Master's of Science in Public Health. And my areas of interest are environmental health, the connection between our environment, the other animals and organisms that live in there, and the human health, specifically climate change and how it's already impacting our everyday life. And I also work with research methods, and that's the class I'll be teaching this term. Thank you very much. Back to you, Ashley.
Thank you. Wonderful. Amy, I will pass it over to you. So please give us a little introduction of yourself, and then you can start sharing your slides and launch into your presentation.
Great, sounds wonderful. So my name is Amy Heim. I'm a plant community ecologist, and I'm fascinated by how plants basically interact with each other and how they affect the environment. And so for the past 10 years, I've sort of been applying that passion to green roofs and looking at how we can increase green roof biodiversity by applying the examples from the natural environment to the green roof system. So what I'm sharing with you today is a chapter from my PhD, which I just successfully defended at the beginning of August, which is very exciting. And I'm really excited to share with you today. So any questions, happy to answer, because I can, at least if I don't know the answer, point you in the right answer, right direction for green roofs. So I'm just going to click on my slide. I think I'm just going to share the screen and I'll do that. Yes, just give me one moment. So from beginning, wonderful. So I believe everyone should be all set and see the slide. Good, wonderful, thank you. All right, so again, just thank you for coming to listen to my presentation today. I'm going to be sharing with you basically a way we can try to increase the biodiversity and ecosystem services provided by green roofs through the use of heterogeneity or variation in space. So just to begin, a green roof is exactly what it sounds like. It's vegetation on top of a roof surface. And a green roof is really composed of a number of different layers. They may vary from roof to roof, but in general, a green roof will have a vegetation layer placed on top of a substrate layer, on top of a water retention fabric or a root barrier layer, all of which is on top of the roof itself. Now, we tend to break green roofs into two different categories. You have an intensive green roof, which has a substrate greater than or equal to 20 centimeters, and an extensive green roof, which has a substrate depth less than or equal to 15 centimeters. Intensive green roofs can really fit a wide variety of plant species on them, say trees or shrubs, perhaps different plants you're interested in for farming, but they're extremely heavy and really cannot be fitted onto very many buildings. The plus side of them, though, is that they're very efficient at providing different ecosystem services because the plants are bigger and the substrate depth is deeper. On the other side of the coin are the shallow extensive green roofs. These can be fitted onto a much wider array of buildings and structures, and at the same time, they require very little maintenance. So these aren't usually watered or weeded. However, compared to the intensive green roof, they're not as efficient at particular ecosystem services because the shallow soil and the smaller plants just aren't as efficient at it. But any plant in a city is better than no plant, so they're still associated with quite a few benefits. Now, the majority of green roofs are extensive green roofs because these can be fitted onto so many different structures. And so the work that we do in our lab are really focused on this extensive green roof system. So why are people interested in building green roofs? And what it comes down to is that our urban population and our cities are increasing. Today, 3.9 billion people live in urban centers, a number projected to increase to 6.3 billion by 2050. In Canada alone, 27.1 million people currently live in cities, which is 81% of our population. This really shows that there's a need to make these cities as sustainable and environmentally friendly as possible. I don't necessarily have anything against cities. I think there are quite a few wonderful things in them, but they are associated with a number of negative side effects. They consume 75% of the global primary energy, emit 50 to 60% of the world's greenhouse gases. They're warmer than neighboring green space, a phenomenon known as the heat island effect. They're associated with habitat loss and fragmentation. They contribute to stormwater runoff, which is when rainwater runs over the impervious surfaces of a city, carrying with it pollutants such as oils and heavy metals into local waterways. And they're also associated with air pollution. Fortunately, vegetation can help reduce some of the negative side effects associated with urbanization. So plants need water, reducing stormwater runoff. Plants help cool the area around them. Plants attract pollinators, provide habitat, and they actually can also breathe in, as you could say, breathe in, a plant's way of breathing, pollutants through the stomata, helping to reduce air pollution. And a neat thing about green roofs in particular is that it takes advantage of an underused surface. There's not very much space in cities, and so using a rooftop to provide space for vegetation allows us to sort of increase benefits vegetation provides our urban centers. Now, this is a little bit of a complicated figure, but it's more or less a way to break down and inform you that different plants are actually more efficient at different services. And this is because different plants possess different plant traits or characteristics. For example, a green roof study that was conducted by Lundholm et al. Found that plants that are taller are more efficient at capturing stormwater runoff. And so there's really been an interest in making associations between particular plant traits and different ecosystem services. And at the same time, there's an interest in looking at how we can increase the diversity of traits in the green roof system. And in order to do this, we have to first understand where to collect plants from. And so in Nova Scotia, Canada, which is where I do my work, we select plant species from similar environmental conditions to green roofs, those exposed to drought, high wind, and extreme temperatures. The picture you see here is of the coastal barrens, and the species that are native to this habitat have succeeded quite well in the green roof system. In terms of the life forms that we use on our green roofs, succulents are by far the most popular worldwide. They're extremely drought tolerant, and they can survive in very shallow soil. Some species of succulents can even survive 2 years without any water, and I've seen succulents growing on no substrate at all, so very drought tolerant. But they're not as efficient at some of the ecosystem services we're interested in as other potential green roof vegetation. Species of grasses can also be used on green roofs. They require slightly deeper soil than the succulents and not as drought tolerant, but they're some of the best performers in terms of absorbing air pollution, reducing substrate temperature, and stormwater runoff. Another popular growth form are different species of forbs. Again, not as drought tolerant as the previous species, but they offer a beautiful flowering array that's desirable to both consumers as well as the herbivore and pollinator community. The final group that we use in our green roofs are different species of creeping shrubs. So these would be cranberries or blueberries, and it's quite exciting to use these because, well, again, they have flowers, which is beautiful for the pollinators, but also they produce fruit, which is exciting for us as consumers. And a really exciting thing here is that we've actually successfully grown cranberries on our green roof in 15 centimeters of soil and no water. So I always love seeing that in our green roof system. So hopefully one thing you'll notice as I was discussing these different species is that these different plants are associated with different services. And so the interest really has been to try to increase green roof biodiversity as a way to increase the ecosystem services provided by green roofs. However, just because you have plant species you want to grow together does not mean they'll be able to coexist in the same environment. And so this is really where my research has come in. I've been applying examples from the natural environment to the green roof system. The particular example I'm sharing with you today involves spatial heterogeneity or variation in space. You can create heterogeneity on your green roof in a number of different ways, say through varied soil depth, through the addition of surface features such as logs or rocks, or even from shade from neighboring buildings. And what this does is it creates different microsites or niches that are favorable to different plant species, encouraging biodiversity. The experiment I'm sharing with you today really stems from one key question. So how does heterogeneity influence plant community composition? And I'm interested in this in both terms of biodiversity, so the number of different species in the treatment, as well as in terms of plant traits, because we know that plant traits are associated with different key ecosystem services or benefits. This experiment involved 4 soil depth treatments with 6 replicates each. I had 3 soil treatments with an even soil depth, so a homogeneous soil depth of 5, 10, and 15 centimeters. And I had 1 treatment with a varied soil depth treatment that varied between 5 and 15 centimeters. The key thing to keep in mind during this presentation is that the quantity of substrate or soil between the 10 centimeter treatment and 15 centimeter treatment was equal. So it really allows us to make a comparison between a treatment that's homogeneous and more heterogeneous. This experiment lasted for 4 years, and I originally planted 15 species into it, and I allowed weedy species to naturally colonize this system. In terms of the data that I collected data on above ground biomass, and then I also created a trait database for every species found in the experiment. The key thing for this trait database is that I didn't want to impact this ongoing study, so the traits came from species in similar environmental conditions outside this experiment. At the end of the study, I found in total 46 different species. 2 of these species that were most common were different species of grass. 2 of the most common species were succulent. 1 was a creeping shrub, and 2 were forbs. Out of all these most common species, only 1 of them was a colonizing weedy species, which was a clover Trifolium dubium. At the end of the study in August 2018, I basically did a comparison of the community composition, the plant composition between each treatment, and we found that there was variation throughout the treatments. And this is particularly cool, again, for the 5, 15, and 10 centimeter treatment, because they contain the same quantity of soil, but they formed distinct plant communities. The treatments with the greatest variation was the 15 and 5 centimeter treatment. So the treatment that was the most stressed and the treatment that was under the least amount of stress had the greatest variation. When we compare biodiversity and biomass data between treatments, I observed that the 15 centimeter treatment contained the greatest biomass and biodiversity, and the 5 centimeter treatment contained the smallest degree of biomass and biodiversity. What I was really hoping to see was a variation between the 5, 15, and 10 centimeter treatment, but really very little variation was observed when you look at it in terms of the ANOVA and Tukey post-hoc test that was done. But in terms of the averages, on average, the 5, 15 centimeter treatment, the treatment with a varied soil depth, was basically higher in biomass and biodiversity than the 10 centimeter treatment. The most interesting aspect of the study really comes down to the plant traits. And although I collected in total 5 different plant traits, I'm only sharing the 2 that had the most interesting results, and that was plant height and specific leaf area. For plant height, I measured this just by taking the height from the base of the plant to the top of the plant. And what I found was the treatment with a varied soil depth formed a plant community that was taller than the treatment with no variation. And this is cool because taller plants are more efficient at stormwater retention, thermal regulation, and carbon capture. And these are some of the main reasons why green roofs are built. For the second trait, specific leaf area, this is basically a measurement that's looking at how large and thin the leaves are. And again, we found that a varied soil depth basically contributed to a plant community with larger, thinner leaves. And this is again cool because this particular trait is associated with stormwater retention and thermal regulation. And so what both of these studies results show is that a heterogeneous treatment can, compared to more homogeneous treatment, may increase the ecosystem services provided by the green roof system. So in summary, in just terms of these 2 aspects of this project, I found that compared to a more homogeneous system, the heterogeneous treatment led to the formation of a distinct plant community, and it also led to an increase in the density of these desired traits. In terms of what it means for green roofs in general, well, what this shows is that we can increase the benefits green roofs provide without increasing substrate depth. And so if you go back to the beginning of my presentation, where I talked about the green roofs with deeper substrates, how they're more efficient at particular ecosystem services, well, this is one way that we can try to increase these benefits without increasing the weight of the green roof system, allowing more roofs to, well, benefit from these different vegetative profiles. And with that, of course, thanks to everyone who's helped me with my research, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy, for that presentation. That was really fascinating. Before we move on, do you mind just popping your microphone a tiny bit further back? I'm getting a little bit of extra air, and I think it would.
Sorry about that.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's great. No problem at all. We are going to move on to our judges and speaker category. So Judges, I'll leave it in your hands to decide how you want to ask questions. Sometimes they go one at a time, or you can all ask all your questions in a row, whatever works for you.
Yeah.
Wait, before we begin, would you like it to be left on my PowerPoint slide or go back to the view of everybody?
Oh, please leave your slides on.
Wonderful.
I've often found it helpful just to refer back to them when you're trying to explain something.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
True. Yeah, can I go first, Cecilia, or?
Yeah, maybe we can do one and
like
one.
alternate. Yeah, love that. Yeah, I'm just wondering, so I think on slide 32 you have a photo, right? I assume that was the setup that you did for the study.
So you are correct. The one on the
Yes.
left here is without the planting, and then of course the one on the right is after planting.
Yeah, so that's the 4 years, the one on the right.
It's actually not after 4 years. I believe this one is after 3 years. It's just it's a better looking photo.
Okay, yeah, I think my question is, because for your study, and particularly in what you present to us, you only focus on the soil depth variation.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, for this setup, so the other, causes of variation, for instance, shading was not like accounted for. So the setup is completely far from like an HVAC or any like structure that can shade it.
Yes, you're correct. And there's been quite a bit of research involving green roofs with shade. There's actually one involving the solar panels and green roofs in combination, because they can provide shade, which is another form of heterogeneity, which can create the different microsites. So the purpose of this project was really to focus on just one particular aspect of variation. And unfortunately, just because St. Mary's is a small university and space was limited, you can see it's probably something you we're observing the picture here. We do sometimes have shade in different areas. And so really the goal was to have the block effect involved with trying to take that into control and consideration. So they weren't evenly distributed. So there wasn't just the deeper soil depth at one end and vice versa. But again, an issue with this one is very much its small scale. I would like to see it on a larger green roof system. It's very much more of a proof of concept that it can contribute to biodiversity as well as to the variation in plant traits, but it does need to be done on a larger scale.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. I'll switch to you, Cecilia, for now.
Excellent. My question has to do with the albedo. Can't remember the number of the slide where you mentioned it, but it's among the characteristics for the green roofs, right? So
maybe I have the memory. Is this
19? Yes, perfect.
This one. Okay, wonderful.
So considering the role of albedo with climate change, I would love to hear more about this in the context of green roofs.
So this was a super cool one to do because there's actually very few, I personally have read very few studies that involve the albedo in the green roof system. My particular project didn't do it because we've done it on vegetation we've used on our green roofs in the past, but it's basically kind of what you would expect. And so color can play a large role in the reflection from the sunlight onto the surface and affects the albedo. And so what we found is that, well, plants with a lighter color then have a lower albedo, contributing to greater substrate cooling.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one of the cool ones I did actually for this one a few years ago was looking actually on lichen on the green roof, because lichen is quite light in color and it really does quite a good job at helping to cool the substrate. So we get some of these thicker lichen mats here in Nova Scotia, and we've successfully transplanted them onto our green roof system.
Excellent, very interesting, thank you.
Yeah, I have another question, Amy. So for how do you find the heterogeneity of the soil depth affects the water distribution or like the irrigation needs of your setup?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to go back to the slide that shows sort of the general setup. So I think that'll be a best way to describe it. And so in general, what we have is the deeper the soil is, the more moisture that's going to be retained in the soil. So that's the reason why you see greater biomass and diversity in this system. So this heterogeneous system basically the deeper soil will have slightly deeper, slightly larger resources of water in it compared to this more shallow system. It's not as extreme as I would have hoped. I do think I did a pilot study before this one using only 2 species, a succulent that performs best on 5 centimeters of soil. It does very poor in shade, and then a grass, which prefers deeper soil. And they didn't actually go into their separate niches in this heterogeneous system. They were more likely to stay isolated where they were. And so that was sort of the reason of continuing this with a larger group of plant species. But in general, this deeper section will have more moisture in it. It should be cooler because of the greater moisture. But because this is a fairly small heterogeneity, what you'll find is that grasses growing on this sort of raised bit of 5 centimeter can get their roots into this lower bit. And so I think that's part of the reason why I didn't really see that variation in richness and biodiversity. What I did do though, and again, it's small scale because I only have 6 replicates, is I did a, and I can, oh, that's right, I'm sharing my screen. I actually have my thesis up so I can share things with you. I did a combination basically to examine how, gotta go to the end. I did a combination to basically examine how, if this was done at a larger scale, things might change. So I did a rarefied species richness curve, which basically I combined the 5 and 10, or sorry, the 5 and 15 centimeter plots together to make a pretend 5 and 15 centimeter one. And so according to the rarefied species richness curve, we should still see a greater richness in this sort of mixed treatment, but it really does need to be done at a larger scale.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
My next question has to do with what you mentioned about the succulents. I love those plants, but I'm not sure they're native to Canada. So in terms of native species, or I'm not sure the right term is invasive, but that might be close to what I want to talk. What are their guidelines? What are their recommendations? What would you suggest?
So it's very much dependent on the city and the consumer. So very much there isn't sort of a, I would say right now in Canada, a set guidelines. Different cities will have different recommendations. I know a colleague in Toronto, Scott McIver, who does a lot of great green roof research there, a few years ago was looking to make recommendations to the city. And I'm not sure if that had gone through. I haven't looked into that. But basically in Nova Scotia, we have one species of succulent that used to be a sedum species, but they changed the name as they like to do, called Rhodiola rosea. And this does quite well in our green roof system. And I did use it in my particular experiment. Part of the reason we really got, my supervisor really got started in this was trying to introduce some native species into the green roof, because the majority very much are not native to North America. They're usually from Europe, and they're generally from the genus Sedum. So there's pretty much just these monocultures of succulent plants that you see here. And research has really shown that, well, increasing the biodiversity can really have quite a few benefits. And so my personal recommendation would be, it's very dependent on where you are. And so these succulents here, they can, if they're right next to a habitat that they really like, do quite well and take over. But the thing is, they do not do well when competing against other species. So some of the habitats that they could succeed in would be something like this, but these are hard habitats to grow on, and they don't usually occur near cities, and so it's less of a concern in cities. And so I'm going to very much leave it up to the consumer and the city. My goal will be to push for biodiversity and increasing plants in the city. You know, take it small and build it up. I do think just sedum mats isn't as good as treatments that have grasses and forbs and maybe some native succulents on them, but I personally will always say that some vegetation in a city is better than none. So it's not really a black and white answer, which you might have hoped for, but it very much is that, yeah, you're right. There's, I do wish that there was just a more biodiverse roofs out there, and that we had some more native succulents, but there's a few here if you are interested in the native system.
Oh. well, it might not be black and white, but I see it's very strongly science-based, so I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, so another question of mine. So I know like your study, your setup, like it's just a small scale, and you mentioned that you'd really want it to be like, you know, the large scale ones, maybe covering more area of the roof. But I'm wondering maybe on, you know, other countries that they did this with a bigger roof size. What is like the structural integrity with regards to the roof system? For instance, does it affect that, you know, you have one block that's has a bit, you know, thicker substrate and one that's not? So yeah, I'm just curious how that goes.
It's a really, really good question. And I know my supervisor was actually, this study made my supervisor nervous every winter because of course in Nova Scotia we get snow, and so he was always worried about the roof weight because there's extra weight here because of our setup. But that's particular to this project, so that won't be involved with what you would be without your particular question. So basically what'll happen is the engineers will go out to the roof, and unfortunately I'm not involved with the engineering aspect of it, so I don't know specifically what they look for in terms of the weight requirements, but they'll basically give a recommendation to the designer to basically let them know what the specifications are and what it can take in terms of the green roof itself. And so you have to sort of work within those parameters. So the goal here was really like, well, if 10 centimeter, if the roof can handle 10 centimeters of substrate, then it can handle 10 centimeters of substrate. And you wouldn't use cement to make that variation. This was purely to test variation at the below ground level and not variation at the surface level. So just sort of to reduce that. So what I would actually do on a larger green roof is create mounds to create that heterogeneity. And we did this on another small system, which is pretty cool. We did mounds adjacent to a more even system, actually using hydro seeding, because to get the variation in different types of vegetation. But large scale heterogeneity has generally just been done to encourage invertebrate diversity. There really isn't this large scale study that has been done yet. So it's still something that's needed.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think like this will be like, this is really good once you have that on a large scale. And I think it's even something that, you know, building owners or constructions like have to consider at the start. So
Absolutely.
if this study gets adapted wildly, something like to plan early on and have the system.
That's my hope. And I'm actually going to be creating a, because this work and the work that my supervisor's been doing sort of accumulates about 15 years of green roofs research in this lab. And so we're going to be creating a policy brief for green roofs in our region, which will certainly include heterogeneity on it. So my hope is that we'll start to get more interest out there. Because you know, it touches not just on the scientific community, because if you don't relate it to the public and just let people be aware, then it's not really going to go anywhere.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Amy.
What you mentioned right now about the policy brief really got me excited because of the knowledge translation side of it. So maybe drawing a little bit on what you're planning to share there, I would like to hear, what would you like to see long-term in this field in two areas? A, research, and B, policies, really.
So the research I'm interested in is actually, there's a really great research group in Sweden that I'm quite excited by some of the work that they're doing. They have a chronosequence of green roofs across 3 different cities, 2 in Sweden and 1 in Finland. And what they're looking at is actually the changes in green roofs over time and looking at the green roofs as a whole. So in terms of the plant community, which tends to be my focus, but also the soil, the below ground nutrients. And because there really hasn't been much looking at how green roofs change over time. And so understanding how they change, how they affect ecosystem services will help us design green roofs that can really provide us the greatest amount of ecosystem services for basically the longest duration of time. So I'm kind of excited right now about the time aspect of them. And then I'm also excited about below ground research that's being done, mainly involving the microbial community, such as mycorrhizae, because of course below ground community is going to have a huge role on the plants, and we know that plants play a huge role in the ecosystem services that are provided. So I'm kind of interested in that aspect for the future for research. In terms of right now, my main goal with this policy brief is to introduce people to the vegetation, and it's going to be specific to Nova Scotia because that's where our research is based, but I think the principles can certainly be applied elsewhere. But it's going to focus in on the type of vegetation that has been successful in our system, and it's going to focus in on I'm going to be mentioning plant traits. So that's kind of the characteristics that I was describing before, so that people can have an idea of building a roof that's kind of designed for the reasons they want it. So for example, we know that taller plant species are more efficient at stormwater runoff. So we'll provide that information for them. We know that species that flower at different times are better for pollinators because they can get resources throughout the year. So then we'll provide information on that for them. It's more or less very much an intro, public friendly way of being like, this is the research that we've done in our lab for 15 years. It's really shown to be useful in the green roof system, and we want to make it available to you. We really recommend biodiverse green roofs. There's a number of different ways you can create biodiversity, not just through heterogeneity, which I've shown here. You can create it by combining plants together that are kind of using resources in different ways. So if a plant uses resources in different ways, it's able to coexist because they're basically not competing for resources in the same manner. So it's going to touch on that. And that's kind of the plan for it right now. I'm going to be basing it off of some rain garden studies that were done in Australia that I thought were done really well. So a different system, but the way they showed it to the public, I thought was well done. So I'm going to be kind of basing it off that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think for my last question, this is like just out of curiosity. You have a photo of a bus with like a green
I
roof.
know, right? I love that photo.
Does it really exist, or is it?
It exists. I don't know if it still
yeah.
exists, but this was an actual bus that was going around.
In US.
Again, any vegetation in the city is better than no vegetation,
Yeah.
but certainly some will do better than others. I think this was more or less just to get people, aware, because this is a great way to get people talking about vegetation in the city and green roofs in general. And that's very much, in my opinion, what this bus does. I want to say, this is a picture I use on my slides for years now. And so I've in some ways forgotten what city it's from, but I want to say Portland, certainly the US. But yeah, it was a real thing that was done.
Okay, yeah, that looks awesome.
Yeah. Actually, a really cool thing. I'm sorry for going off topic, but I went to Australia, where they do some great green roof research, and they actually have green tram tracks there, which are absolutely amazing. And I think that would be one of the coolest things if we could get that in Canada. Yeah, because if you think about it, the plants that we grow on our green roofs, like rocky habitats, you can easily put that on tram or train tracks. But of course, I think trams would be easier for maintenance than our railway system, but a very cool aspect and more ways you can get greening into our cities.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
I have more questions, but I think we have some questions from the audience. So Ashley, all yours.
Please feel free to go ahead and ask any others that you have before we move on to the audience Q&A.
I'll save mine for later.
Okay, sure. I'll come back to you. Amy, so we do have a few questions from our audience. And again, thank you for your presentation. That was really fascinating. And our first one is, what kind of substrate were you using?
Yeah, so this is actually, there's so many areas that I want to get more into and try more things in. So it's actually a really great question. We use the might be pronouncing it wrong, the Superflor X substrate, which we get from New Brunswick. We don't actually have a supplier here in Nova Scotia. And so actually my lab mate, Taylor Hicks, just finished a project looking at substrate specific for Nova Scotia, because having sort of an area specific substrate, you have less travel between provinces. So of course, less contribution to greenhouse gases would be beautiful. But yeah, we tend to just use the standard green roof substrate, so something that they've put together, which is the superfluorex that we use.
I imagine that's very lightweight.
Oh yes, very lightweight. It's another topic you can go into. That's one of the interesting aspects about green roofs. We call it substrate because it certainly isn't soil. It's a man-made substrate that we put together. And one of the key aspects of it is that it is lightweight.
Wonderful. You touched on this already with some of your answers, but is this study being replicated in other climates?
Great question. This particular study done in this manner is not. There hasn't been too much heterogeneity stuff out there done in this manner. We recently had, and if you are interested in heterogeneity, I should have put up some more papers at the end so you could read them. We literally just had a heterogeneity review paper or review article set come out where a bunch of different researchers on this particular topic involving heterogeneity wrote about it. So I definitely recommend looking at that. But no, this one isn't yet done on the green roof scale. There's some really cool stuff going on the ground surface involving heterogeneity, which certainly can apply to the green roof, but not on the green roof itself that I've seen yet.
Wonderful, thank you. Do you use any plant fertilizer during your growing process?
Really, another really good question. And so basically, a lot of times when we do work with green roofs, a lot of the stuff we do comes from original work that came from Europe. A lot of this started in Germany, and we base it off of what's called the FLL guidelines. And so those recommend that with this type of green roof, extensive green roofs require very little maintenance. The substrate tends to have a high quantity of nutrients in it to begin with. And then over time, it's one of those ones where opinions will differ depending on who you're talking to and what they're interested in. So it's not a black and white answer, but what I highly recommend and what we've been finding in our research, again, the researcher I mentioned, 𝐉𝐔𝐃𝐄𝐑, who did the soil work, was looking at nutrients as well. But a lot of these plants that we use, they come from habitats that have very low nutrient levels. And so they don't need as many nutrients that this green roof substrate currently has in it. And at the same time, if you have, say, too high a level of organic matter in the substrate, it's going to go down over time. And if you have a season like we have here in Nova Scotia, where you're giving the plants lots of nutrients, and at the beginning of our growing season, they get lots of water, they're going to get very tall, which makes them less drought tolerant. And so as the season goes on, because of all those nutrients, they're going to get taller. They might not do so well during drought and start to die back. So really, my personal recommendation would be to use less additions of nutrients to the green roof. But again, it's something I'd want to do some more studies with. And it's also one of the reasons why I'm actually super excited about the work in Sweden, because they're really doing some great studies on the nutrient dynamics of roofs.
Awesome, thank you. And then our last question is what I'm actually kind of excited about. Do you have any recommendations on roof preparation and maintenance for green roof beginners?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess it all comes back to what your roof is. If it's your personal house, then you can pretty much do many different things. The most important thing on a green roof is to remove trees. So tree seeds, we get them on our green roofs a bunch. And so I think if you just go up to your roof about once a year, you can easily get rid of the tree seeds. You have to, of course, make sure that the area is free for draining purposes, so you don't have that extra weight on the system. But for our green roof that I work on with my university, it really requires very little maintenance. We don't really water it. The green roof that's not a part of a project, we don't weed except for removing tree seeds. But I do know that, again, it depends who you are. So I do know that the people who are in charge of sort of the air conditioning and stuff like that on the roof would prefer there being no green roof to a green roof. So I will put that out there. I guess it does. It's not always as easy as one might like. So, but unfortunately, I don't know that aspect of it.
Awesome, thank you. That is the end of our audience Q&A for now. Cecilia, I'll just circle back to you quickly.
Yeah, I was thinking that obviously in any ecosystem, plants are not the only organisms, right? So how does this work? What other organisms or living beings happen with green roofs?
Really great question. One of my favorites is, there's a lot of studies from Sweden. One of my favorites is a study from Sweden who looked at the invertebrates in substrate, and they actually found even in the green roof, there's actually some rare species there. I wish I had the quote up for you. It's a nice other slide that I use sometimes, but they actually had rare and endangered species on their green roof system, which was pretty cool. And then in terms of the green roofs here in Nova Scotia, we've done quite a few studies with pollinators. So we certainly have a large number of pollinators on the green roofs. Depending on how tall your green roof will influence what gets up there. And so the taller the roof is, the lower the biodiversity generally tends to be, because it's just harder to get up there. But for our green roof, I've seen worms up on it, believe it or not. I've actually seen ants farming aphids up there, which is really cool to see. And then of course you have birds. I know quite a few green roofs, especially ones that the public can see. You generally will have photos associated with it, such as, oh, so-and-so bird had a baby up on the roof. Come look at the babies. Well, for us, it's at our library. We have the seagulls that will have baby chicks on the roof here, which is pretty cool. And then there is, of course, the human aspect. So they're not living on the roof, humans, but if you can just increase vegetation in the city, even just through green roofs, if you're able to see it, it can certainly help just with the mental state, make you a bit happier.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Any other questions from you, Cecilia?
I think that covers it.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Amy. That was a really fascinating presentation. I really enjoyed hearing about the work that you've been doing. And I also want to say thank you so much for our judges for coming here today. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen and ask your questions and share your expertise with us. Before I just give a short closing presentation, do we have any final remarks from our judges? Claris, anything you'd like to end off with? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so thank you so much, Amy. It's really fascinating. And I think like this is not my field of expertise, but I'm fascinated, especially when you mentioned like, yeah, like for instance, solar can coexist with green roof, and it's actually also beneficial on the solar aspect, like the energy aspect. So, and yeah, I agree with all the benefits that you mentioned. And I guess I'm looking forward for the next phase of your study and like the wider implementation.
Thank you. Yeah, and if anyone has questions, my email's here, happy to answer.
And Cecilia?
Just wanted to say that thank you for this excellent presentation that conveyed how fascinated you are by this topic and piqued my interest and my curiosity to learn more about it. Thank you. And excellent questions from the audience. So thank you for dwelling on that too.
Awesome. Yeah, I really could feel your energy and enthusiasm for it, Amy. It was awesome. I'm just going to share my screen quickly just to have a little bit of closing information here. So we do have 2 more science symposium events coming up. And if you would like to register to attend those, you can follow SCWIST on Eventbrite and you'll find them there. And you can also go to our website, which is squist.ca/events, and you'll find our science symposium events listed there as well. The next one in the global warming category is coming up on September 8th, and that will be with Kristen Hayward from Queen's University. Finally, if you're looking for any updates on the science symposium, you can always head to our website and check out our catalog. There's lots of information there. And that is the end from me. I want to say thank you so much to our judges again, and thank you, Amy, for joining us and giving your presentation. And please enjoy the rest of your what looks like sunny afternoon.